So this is 05:10 hours GMT on Sunday, 20th of November 2022. This is part A of the Baby Angel Geronimo editions Khoodeelaar television channel on internet, not on satellite, not on terrestrial, and not on cable. They've got a piece on the Saturday's Financial Times HTSI magazine. Cover picture is this. Cover picture features Kate Blanchett, the actress. But the interesting thing is that she's talking about acting, activism, and spirit animals. We shall see if we can catch up on Kate Blanchett's activism and spirit animals. Now, on the Times of Saturday, the 19th, on the front page, there is a heading that we discussed the previous edition. The heading is Mat Chief, that is London Metropolitan Police Chief, that is the police commissioner. It says it should be easier to sack police. Now, 500 yard officers accused of serious misconduct. 500 members of the Metropolitan Police are accused of serious misconduct. This is not just unbelievable. This is proof that there is no due process, there is no rule of law, and there is no action against criminals in the United Kingdom, really. And the main criminal, Boris Johnson, has been featured in a Financial Times piece by Sebastian Payne. What is the Financial Times Sebastian Payne saying? Financial Times Sebastian Payne is saying, the headline is, is that visible? This headline says, Boris Johnson's last stand. And it is page 1 of the Life and Arts section. And then it goes on to page 4. Now let's see what the page 4 is. Goes on to page 4, and there is a spread on page 4 and 5 of the Financial Times, and it says about Sebastian Payne. I'm going off the camera for a minute. Okay, it says, what does it describe him as? So it describes Sebastian Payne as the FT's Whitehall editor. The Fall of Boris Johnson, his second book, is published by Pan Macmillan on November 24th. So that is these 3 pages, big pages, on Follow Boris Johnson are based on his book, his second book. And the last paragraph of this piece by Sebastian Payne, this is a long piece, and it says, throughout the day, that was the last day of Johnson's kind of stay as number 10 Downing Street Prime Minister. Prime Minister had told aides that he owed the 14 million people who had voted for him in the 2019 election to deliver on their priorities. His pledge would only be partially complete. Johnson had taken the UK out of the EU, seen it through the coronavirus pandemic, and taken a world-leading role in the Ukrainian war. But his administration had collapsed. Johnson slept on his decision to leave the job he had dreamt of since childhood. The next morning, he acted on it. Now that's the last paragraph as printed on the Financial Times piece by Sebastian Payne. Now, there are bits that I shall be reading just for the record, for the reference. So here is a bit. So Johnson was returning to the bunker. Before returning to the bunker, Johnson spoke to Queen Elizabeth at his weekly audience with her. No one except Johnson and the monarch knew what was discussed on that phone call, though it seems impossible that his dire political situation was not a topic. One of Johnson's inner circle confirmed every possibility was war gamed in the bunker, including a snap election, a particularly unwelcome prospect for the most recent intake of Tory MPs, many of whom had won slim majorities in the former Labour strongholds. They are terrified because they have never been back to their patches at the ballot box, said one person involved. An ally of Johnson confirmed. Okay. An ally of Johnson confirmed an ally of Johnson confirmed it was inevitable that the idea was discussed in the final hours. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Brexit Opportunities Minister, made it clear to colleagues that he thought the idea was unwise. Johnson rejected the proposal, according to those present. It was never going to happen, one ally said. However, such were the fears within Whitehall that Johnson might do something reckless if his position was threatened, that secret planning had taken place in the preceding months, in case he asked the Queen to dissolve Parliament. In the lead up to Johnson's final days, there was much media chatter about the Lascelles principle, a constitutional convention from 1950 that defined the circumstances in which a monarch could reject a prime minister's request to do this. The Lascelles principles were defined by Alan Tommy Lascelles, King George VI's private secretary, in a pseudonymous letter under the sobriquet Senex, Senex. To the Times, he set out the three criteria when an election request could be rightly rejected. The existing parliament was still vital, viable, and capable of doing its job. A general election would be detrimental to the national economy. He, the king, could rely on finding another prime minister who would carry on his government for a reasonable period with a working majority in the House of Commons. Even during the chaos of Johnson's final days, all three of those conditions would surely have been met. Parliament was still viable thanks to the Conservative Party's 80-seat majority, and there was no danger it would lose a confidence vote. MPs were terrified of being wiped out by Labour. Soaring inflation and the cost of living crisis would mean that a 6-week campaign would harm the economy. And there were plenty of viable interim Tory leadership contenders who could have commanded a majority in the House of Commons. How would this have been communicated to Johnson? For the Queen to reject an election request outright would have prompted a full-blown constitutional crisis and put the monarch in the most perilous position of her reign. One senior Whitehall figure said, it was a question that couldn't be put to the Queen because the Queen would have to say yes. The Prime Minister cannot ask the question to which she ought to say no by the convention. Instead, a magic triangle of senior establishment figures had ensured it would never reach that point. Brady, representing the Parliamentary Conservative Party, Simon Case, heading up the civil service, and the Queen's chief courtier, Edward Young, had private channels of communication to ensure safeguards were in place. As Johnson's grip on power became more precarious, one senior Whitehall insider said of the moment, if there was an effort to call an election, Tory MPs would have expected Brady to communicate to the palace that we would be holding a vote of confidence in the very near future, and that it might make sense for Her Majesty to be unavailable for a day. Another senior official confirmed it would be politely communicated to Downing Street that Her Majesty couldn't come to the phone had Johnson requested a call on the intention of dissolving Parliament. One Johnson ally said he knew it was a fruitless idea. Two, that the palace would have wanted to see if there were others who could command confidence instead of accepting his call. At this juncture, Brady would have been politely asked by the palace if his party could decide on another leader who would have Parliament's confidence. All the guidance was informal, never tested, as Johnson opted not to push the election button. The last bold move discussed in the bunker was another major apology outside Downing Street by Johnson for his handling of the Pincher affair. That was quickly rejected because we'd already done about 50 of them, one official said. The small dining room can be found on the second floor of Downing Street, above the Prime Minister's office and the cabinet room, and a couple of corridors along the room from study that had become the bunker. Stewing in and around this wood-paneled room for nearly 3 hours with increasingly cold pots of tea were Nadim Zahawi, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, Gran Shapps, Simon Hart, Michelle Donnellan, and Kit Malthouse. The Security Convention that phones should be left at the entrance of number 10 had been abandoned as ministers oscillated between watching Johnson's liaison committee appearance, looking at social media, reading the news, and WhatsApping MPs and their private offices with thoughts about when the government would collapse. Number 10 aides were sent to mind the ministers, trying to ensure they did not work themselves up into more of a frenzy. One official who witnessed the scene said, "There was the most awkward silence. It was like a tea party. We kept pouring more and more cold tea." Now they were doing that, pouring cold tea, weren't they? Let's see where this pouring of the cold tea leads. It leads to page 5 of the supplement containing Sebastian Payne's long piece based on his second book. Because we had to do something. Because the aides were there, they didn't want to talk among themselves. David Canzini, deputy chief of staff, popped into the dining room on a number of occasions, and according to those present, he pulled ministers aside and muttered that he too privately felt the prime minister needed to resign. The Downing Street team had begun to split. Others who felt he must stay on included Andrew Griffith, head of the number 10 policy unit, Harry, and Ben Elliott, Tory policy co-chair, Tory party co-chair. As Wednesday afternoon drifted into the evening, the scene became more fraught. No one was sure exactly why they were being made to wait so long and what the Prime Minister was doing. News of his discussion with Brady had not made it up the staircase. Those present assumed they would be seeing Johnson as a group. Along with Johnson's strategist Campbell, Heaton Harris. Heaton Harris decided, however, that they should go in and see Johnson one by one. An echo of the cabinet proceedings that went in, an echo of the cabinet procession that went in and saw Margaret Thatcher individually in November 1990 as she questioned their loyalty. By going in one by one, he was able to make slightly different pitches to everybody. One cabinet minister said, "Had we all gone in as Chris Heaton Harris had originally planned, it would have been over by 6 p.m. on Wednesday evening. The PM would have gracefully left, but they rolled the dice another time." So what are they doing? They're rolling the dice one another time. Let's see what this is reading. Before the ministerial meetings began, the consensus in the small dining room was that it was over for Johnson, and the chats would be about persuading him to exit gracefully. One minister said there was not a single person in the dining room, not one, who suggested to the Prime Minister to stay, with the possible exception of Ben Elliott. Now, this is a Financial Times piece that I'm reading from directly. Now, remember the baby angel Geronimo? Baby Angel Geronimo's evidence is, and has always been, that Johnson is the personification of evil. That Johnson is the opposite of morality. That Johnson is the opposite of truthfulness. That Johnson is the opposite of fairness and compassion. And that Johnson epitomizes the lies and liars that surround him, which is what this list of the people present in the bunker and elsewhere in the small dining room, these are the people that constituted the cabal that when Johnson was actually being kind of pressured into leaving. Now, this one, except Ben Elliot, there is no one, says Sebastian Payne, who wanted Johnson to stay. That is completely unprecedented, historic. And when the criminals at the depraved DEFRA carried on the 4 years of lying against Baby Angel Geronimo, they lied against the fact that Baby Angel Geronimo is healthy, that Baby Angel Geronimo has been the healthiest creature who has been targeted by liars trying to find any kind of evidence, any sign that he is not healthy. And the succession of High Court judges, Griffiths being the latest one, the 3 High Court judges sat as stooges for the liars of the DEFRA criminality unit. And all the lies and criminality and the denials and the stoogery were later to be visited on Johnson about his own very political future. We notice that in the Financial Times piece by Sebastian Payne that I'm reading from and diagnosing, there is no mention, there is absolutely no mention of even the existence of Stanley Johnson, Boris Johnson's biological father, or Rachel Johnson, Boris Johnson's biological sister. Now, those two come to mind when reading this piece by Sebastian Payne about the bunker, Boris Johnson's last stand in the bunker. That because those two were probably the only people in the whole world that thought that the worse Boris Johnson's behavior and conduct, the better Boris Johnson was for country, for society, for the world. As they said that when Johnson was caught up in one of the rows about the fact that he had called the Muslim women wearing burqas looking like bank robbers, and Johnson was being condemned for saying that, Stanley Johnson and Rachel Johnson, the biological father of Boris Johnson and biological sister of Boris Johnson, came to express something even worse than Boris Johnson had done. They said that the bad words that Boris Johnson had said against the Muslim women wearing burqas were not bad enough. So they decided, these two, that he should have gone far enough. He should have said something even more exciting. What Rachel Johnson said was what exactly Stanley Johnson had said earlier. that Boris Johnson was being bad, but he was not being bad enough. That Boris Johnson should have been worse than what he had been. Now, this is evil. Johnson was evil. His father was evil. His biological sister was evil. So these are the evil trios. The evil trio personification of the evil doing followers of Satan. As, and I'm paraphrasing, as predicted in the Holy Quran, in the Surah Al-Isra. So Boris Johnson said that in his original condemnation of Muslim women wearing burqas that they look like bank robbers. And Stanley Johnson and his daughter, Rachel Johnson, came out and said that Boris Johnson had not gone far enough. So the bunker, back to the bunker on the Financial Times by Sebastian Payne about Boris Johnson's last stand. Before the audiences took place, though Johnson told his aides he was not rolling over. His view was, I'm not going. If they want me gone, they are going to need to dip their hands in blood and do it themselves, one aide said. The first minister to see Johnson was Nadim Zahawi. According to those who waited with the newly appointed chancellor, he was the most empathetic that Johnson should quit. Now, saying again, he was the most emphatic that Johnson should quit, and that despite the Prime Minister's patronage, he was the leading advocate for instant resignation. As one colleague said, Zahawi was full of brio, and confidentiality, and confidentially told Johnson that it was over. Yet the Prime Minister persuaded him that there remained a path through. By the end of the meeting, they were shaking hands, hugging, and saying, they were going to launch a new financial strategy, one insider said. Priti Patel, Home Secretary, became upset during her audience with Johnson. She did not tell Johnson to go, but said she concluded it was over. She didn't put the knife in, one insider said. More cabinet ministers arrived for informal chats with Johnson, including the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab. Raab awkwardly told number 10 staffers he had to attend a white tie dinner at Mansion House in the City of London that evening, but required assistance with the outfit. An attendant was found with the skills to fix his bow tie. After he was dressed, he saw Johnson, who found his outfit highly amusing. One insider said Raab offered a rare moment of levity. Are you actually going to walk out of the front door to the world's media in white tie? Johnson asked. And Raab responded, you are finding this far too funny. He ended up exiting the building by a side entrance. Throughout the meeting, Culture Secretary and Johnson loyalist to the end, Nadine Dorries, was ever present in the corridors of number 10, together with Johnson's policy chief, Andrew Griffith. drumming up enthusiasm and now reading from the Financial Times, the piece that Sebastian Payne has written in the Financial Times of Saturday, the 19th of November 2022. So he then, okay, so that was the piece. Throughout the meetings, Culture Secretary and Johnson loyalist to the end, Nadine Dorries, was ever present in the corridors of number 10 Downing Street, together with Johnson's policy chief Andrew Griffith, drumming up enthusiasm and discussing how to keep the PM in place. Not everyone appreciated their efforts. It was blind loyalty to the PM. They were nodding dogs, completely lacking any sort of common sense. Now, the nodding dogs, completely lacking any sort of common sense, could also apply to the three judges who serially acted as the rubber stamps for the DEFRA criminals, plotting lies and lies and lies against the perfectly healthy baby angel Geronimo. Nodding dogs, nodding dogs. Completely lacking any common sense. One senior official said. Later that evening, one of the last ministers to see Johnson was Welsh Secretary Simon Hart, who had waited close to 5 hours in the upstairs dining room. Their meeting was to prove one of the most consequential that evening. When Hart eventually saw Johnson, the Prime Minister told him, I have got a plan, just give me till Tuesday. I can turn this around. We owe it to the 14 million people who voted for us. The minister responded, I love your optimism, but I don't think we are there anymore. That was an argument that might have worked 6 weeks or 6 months ago. But I think we are past that point. Hart told Johnson that if the 1922 committee didn't move against him soon, they would find a way to nail you to the floor one way or the other. He then pointed to the Privileges Committee investigation into the autumn into whether the Prime Minister had misled Parliament over so whether Johnson had lied, lied to Parliament. Let's see. So what is the next sentence? Yes, the next sentence is coming. I'm reading the whole thing, actually, as far as I can do. Boris popped in to say yes and sign off all these roles, one official said. We had to have a functioning cabinet that night, whatever happened. After Steve Barclay had moved to health secretary, a new cabinet office minister was also required. There was one other cabinet level change Johnson was adamant to pursue immediately. Johnson had festered throughout the day about Gove's prime minister's questions intervention and decided he wanted revenge. With the events of 2016 back in his mind, Johnson decided to boot out his leveling up secretary. That was his decision alone. One ally said it was the pre-PMQ's prescription. It was a pre-PMQ's prescription. The PM felt he was very treacherous, that is Michael Gove, an unnecessary personal blow on a day that was clearly terminal. Boris felt he really didn't need to do that. Now, did Boris Johnson think about what for 4 years the depraved DEFRA were doing to damage the reputation, the image of the most innocent baby angel Geronimo? Did they need to do any of the lies against the baby angel Geronimo? Any of the lies against the most innocent baby angel Geronimo? What did they say? Whenever the press or so-called media contacted baby angel Geronimo's mom, Helen MacDonald, what did she tell them? And what did they actually take from the conversations? And did they tell the truth about what she was telling about the behavior of Johnson, Defraud, George Injustice Eustace, Christian, the liar, criminal, Middlemiss? With the events of 2016 back in his mind, Johnson decided to boot out his leveling up secretary. That was his decision alone. That PM felt he was very treacherous, an unnecessary personal blow on a day that was clearly terminal for Johnson. Johnson felt he really didn't need to do that. A rumor had arrived at the bunker that Gove was to resign that evening, fueling Johnson's the Prime Minister was urged, don't let him do this. You need to fire him. So he left the study with Harry, that is Guto Harry, and Adams to call up Grove. Grove had spent the rest of Wednesday in his department. Yes. Grove had spent the rest of Wednesday in his So this is the kind of this litany, the litany of lamentable lack of compassion, sympathy, solidarity with Johnson. Absolutely persistent parade of poisonous, disgraceful, contemptuous attitude towards Johnson in the bunker. Bunker is the part of the Downing Street, number 10 Downing Street, which is used by only special guests and with people with extreme severity of illness. It should not be allowed to be used by healthy patients or healthy residents. So what was happening throughout the whole day and throughout the proceedings and throughout the goings on in the bunker was that everyone was saying that Johnson was completely no good and he was destroying the prospect of the Conservative Party and he must go. Now, that is based on evidence of Johnson's misconduct, unfitness, dishonesty. Whereas his complicity with the crooks and liars at the depraved Ephraim against the innocent baby angel Geronimo was completely and utterly based on no evidence whatsoever. So, what Johnson did to shore up this, I mean, so these are the last paragraphs of Sebastian Payne's piece in the Financial Times on page 5 of the live section. Hart left the pub and called Heaton Harris, fuming. You've already offered my job to someone else, so we might as well call it quits now. The chief whip profoundly apologized and said it should not have happened. Hart sat on a park bench to tweet his resignation letter. When a Tory apparition appeared in the form of Charles Moore, Johnson's former Telegraph editor, Moore asked her Hart, "Oh, Simon, what are you up to this evening?" Hart responded, "If you wait 15 seconds, I'm literally resigning." Hart's letter on Twitter said, "Colleagues have done their utmost in private and public to help. You turned the ship around. But it is with sadness that I feel we have passed the point where this is possible." That is addressed to Boris Johnson in the tweeted letter that he had just done. Johnson left the bunker with a what is the word? Yes, departing message. A plan for a cabinet would have to be ready for the following morning. The government would still have to function, but it would not be with him at the head. "I can't do this. It's all too ghastly. It's not me," he announced. At 11 p.m., the bunker dissolved. The aides went home. Johnson returned to the Downing Street flat and spoke with his wife Carrie, who was supportive. She told him, "Do whatever you think is right." He phoned Crosby, his closest and longest serving advisor, to ask for his advice from Australia. "Mate," he said, to Linton Crosby in Australia, "I've been thinking about it. What do you think?" "I think this is unsustainable," Johnson said. "I don't want to destroy the Conservative Party." Crosby responded, "I think you are right. My advice, based on everything I know is that it's irrecoverable. Crosby told him he would be better focusing on his exit terms rather than facing the indignity of being heaved out by the 1922 committee. One of the banca team said that night, by the time he'd gone up to the flat, I think he'd made the decision. It wasn't that he wanted to go, it was a case of the fuckers are not going to throw me out of the door. The banker team had told Johnson they would support him until he personally decided it was over. We were always going to fight to the end for him because we owed it to him, one close ally said. Even if a government could have been formed that Wednesday night, the aides knew it would not last long. We couldn't steal, we couldn't sustain any more attacks. People were still resigning. People weren't answering telephone. People were refusing jobs. We couldn't do it. Boris told us the country deserves better. Throughout the day, the Prime Minister had told aides that he owed the 14 million people who had voted for him in the 2019 election to deliver on their priorities. His pledge would only be partially complete. Johnson had taken the UK out of the EU, seen it through the coronavirus pandemic, and taken a world leading role in the Ukrainian war. But his administration had collapsed. Johnson slept on his decision to leave the job he had dreamt of since childhood. The next morning, he acted on it. That's the end of the Sebastian Payne piece. And I have read most of it. And that actually neatly summarizes the end for Johnson at number 10 Downing Street as leader of the Conservative Party, as the Prime Minister. Indignity, 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 and the unmasking of the liar Johnson. He had no substance to him. He has no truth to him. He has no solidarity being shown to him by anybody. Everyone was saying to him, including the most trusted and longest serving advisor, the Australian criminal, Linton Crosby, that his days at number 10 Downing Street were behind him. He had to go. There is this reminder that when Johnson was being urged by the supporters of the baby angel Geronimo to stop the attacks on baby angel Geronimo, Johnson refused to support baby angel Geronimo, the most innocent baby angel Geronimo. Whereas, as compared to the most innocent baby angel Geronimo, the corrupt, the criminal, liar, Boris Johnson is. Boris Johnson was being completely and utterly abandoned. And that was happening in the daylight, that was happening in the Liaison Committee, that was happening in the Banca, that was happening in the House of Commons, that was happening everywhere. Short of being physically dragged out, Johnson was finished and being humiliated and taken through the streets of political London. And here was the new Winston Churchill. He was the new savior of the Britain at war. Britain at war. I mean, his war was with himself, with the truth, against his lying. So we shall be continuing on what happened in terms of the recollections being put out as a book by Sebastian Payne. Whenever the next episode or the next bits are published or made public. Now back to the Times of Saturday, and the headline, the Metropolitan Police Chief should be saying that it should be easier to sack police. As we said, there is no policing in this country. Policing doesn't exist in Britain. None of the criteria, none of the actual requirements that must exist for a group of people to be called the police and any behavior to be called policing vanished long time ago. And as the Times admits on the page 1 of this Saturday edition, 500 senior, well, when they say Scotland Yard, let's assume that they mean senior, but even if they refer to that as being the mixed representation of people of various ranks in the police, it is still too overwhelming. 500 police are under accusation of all kinds of crimes and criminality. If that is the case, how can the police, the Metropolitan Police, be given the dignity? You know? So we shall be calling this particular edition, the end of this edition, at 52 minutes 37 seconds at 0602 hours GMT on Sunday, the 20th of November 2022. We shall, of course, continue on the theme of Boris Johnson being completely exposed, humiliated, and dragged out and completely exposed as a shell. And we shall be updating on other failures and lies and the legacy of lies. And we shall be updating on the liar, Luthuraman, at the expense of the people of Tower Hamlets, and in context, disgracing the collective image of the UK Bangladeshis.